Hi, I'm Joel from Oz with another review thing. Today we're going to be talking about two webcams that I've been able to play with recently. One, the C922 that I've been using on my stream for a little while now. A couple of issues that I've had with that, as well as what it's good for. As well as I've just bought a Logitech Brio as well, which is meant to be one of the best webcams on the market currently. So let's get into it, compare the two. I'll cover the good points of each camera first. I'll put timestamps somewhere for all that down below as well in the description. And then we'll get into comparing the two, which again, if you're only here for a comparison, skip ahead to that part of the video. So for a close comparison, I've got the two cameras mounted pretty much on top of each other. As well as the lighting I'm using is just standard lighting. It's a room light and a ring light, so it's nothing super professional, but it's what you might expect to see in a standard scene that's not naturally lit. So first up on the chopping block is the C922, which what you're seeing here at the moment is just all of the standard settings, as if you just bought the camera, plugged it in, hit go, called your family on Skype or whatever. As you can see, I'm super laggy. That's because it's currently running at 15 frames per second due to a low light mode, even though it is currently, as up here, meant to be 30 frames per second. And you can tell it is not good. And the image is completely blown out. It needs some adjustment, is long story short. As far as plug and play goes, it's pretty poor, especially since they don't really give you any sort of tutorial on how to do this. This is, you buy the camera, you plug it in, you realize it looks like crap, and then you figure it out your own. Google it, go to forums, all that sort of fun stuff. So as far as user friendliness, it's not the best, but once you do get a few filters applied, which I'll show you in just a tick, it's pretty damn good. Like it's nothing to sneeze at. Now the C922 can also do 1080p at 30 frames per second. Again, this is standard as I've got it at the moment. It is not much different to 720p. So I'll stick to 720 for the rest of this video, but I just wanted to explain that the 1080p is not that exciting. It's about on par with 720. It's not that great. So we're back to 720, 30 frames per second. I just wanted to show, before I flick onto 60, just so you can actually see the difference that it makes, is I'll actually turn on a couple of preset profiles I have for this camera. The first one will make it manual exposure, which actually makes it 30 frames a second, because it turns off that low light mode and makes it manual. And also, if I go into here, I have a filter mode that sort of brightens things up. It saturates it a little bit more, makes it a little bit more natural. But it's still running 30 frames per second. If I flick it over to 60 frames a second here, you'll see a noticeable drop in sharpness to the image. It's really like having your contacts drop out. Like, I'm just expecting Velma to start crawling around the ground looking for her glasses, because it doesn't look good. Long story short, I'll change this too so that's accurate. Look at that, 60 FPS, which is accurate for what the camera can do or what it's supposed to do, but it looks not that great. So 1080p 30 frames per second is not that much of a leap that you'd go to it. And then the 60 FPS for 720 is pretty poor. So you'd really want to stick to that 720p 30 FPS for the most part with the C922. And that brings us to our next camera, the Brio. If I do this, movie magic. So firstly, the first thing you can tell is, and this is completely just plugged straight into the computer, no filters applied. It is a lot more clear. It's less overexposed. The 30 FPS is correct. It is actually running at 30 FPS as best I can tell. And that's straight out of the box, plugged straight into the computer. That is without any messing around at all. And like, you compare it to the one that I have filtered, And I mean, it's not that far off the mark. When like this is totally acceptable. You could plug this in and start using it straight away, and it doesn't look silly, or it doesn't look out of place like you've bought a cheap camera. Which, don't get me wrong, the C922 is less than half the price of the Brio. So you would expect that the Brio should be able to perform to the same standards as the C922, if not better. The other advantage is it can run 60 FPS and 720p very clearly, without an issue. Now, I'm actually using OBS for both this and also the streaming that I do. And OBS, unfortunately, doesn't support a new format called MMF. Apparently, that's I haven't been able to find much on that format, but apparently that would support higher bandwidth to allow it to go to 1080p, 60 FPS, and also 4K at 30. But as it currently sits, 720p is about the only one I can get 60 FPS, and there's 1080p, which again doesn't make a huge increase to the clarity of the picture. Okay, so I've got a bit of a disclaimer. When I originally recorded this, the Brio would not do 1080p at 60 FPS. Now, for some reason, I've had a bit of a change around. Don't know if you can tell. For some reason, I've set it all back up again, and it will. Now, I did see that there's a lot of things on forums of people saying that it either will work and can't understand why anyone has an issue, and there's people asking, how do I get this to work at 4K or 1080p, 60 FPS? So it's not just me who thought that. I didn't just pull that out of my bum. But it will do it apparently even in OBS. But yeah, I thought I'd better record this once I realised that it will do it. I'll try and get a couple of comparisons to throw up, though I can't compare it to the C922 as I don't actually have that camera anymore. Okay, so this is now 4K resolution as well. I'll try and zoom in on a couple of different things to try and give you a bit of comparison between 1080p and 4K, just so it gives you a bit of an idea. But yeah. Keep in mind that even though this is capturing the image at 4K, the canvas I'm putting it on is only 2560 by 1440p. Of course, you've got YouTube compressing everything as well if you're not watching it at full resolution. So even though it can do full 4K, this will be slightly worse quality if only because of that. So now for a direct side-by-side comparison between the two cameras. The only thing I've done is on the C922, that way, I've locked the exposure, so it's actually running at the full 30 or 60 FPS that I need for this, to give you a better comparison. Aside from that, there's no filters applied to them, so this is raw footage of what you get before you had a bit of a play around with it. And obviously the first thing you can see is the Brio is much brighter. It's significantly brighter. I'd actually tone down the brightness on it a little bit, but it does mean it picks up those colors a lot better. Especially my green screen, which means that when I'm trying to do that chroma key to get rid of that background, it's going to be a lot easier without having to, in previous ways I've done is to overexpose and oversaturate the background and then use a filter to then bring down the exposure and saturation again, giving that sort of layered approach to doing it. But aside from that, they're both as smooth as the other. Image quality, obviously the Brio is a little bit better, but you'd expect that. I'll switch it to 60 FPS and we'll see what happens then. So this is where the Brio starts to really shine. You get that 60, that's nice, smooth. There's no sort of haloing effect that I can tell anyway for looking. Motion, and they're both good in that regard, but the C922 has now lost pretty much all of its sharpness and it just looks like I've spilled milk on the lens. So you retain that sharpness even with the smooth image. And again, with 1080p and 30 FPS, it's not a noticeable, not a huge jump from 720p up to 1080, at least not enough to make me want that added resolution. As it stands, I'm only working that on 30 FPS, the same as the 922, and as far as like image sharpness and that, Much the same, if only it might be better for the Brio just because it is just a lot more exposed, so you can see a lot more detail. So in conclusion, what camera would I recommend? Well, the C922 is a great starter camera. You can find it really cheap. $98 is what I've seen it come up for on special. That's 98 Australian dollars. Whereas the Brio is quite expensive. I paid just under 400, just under 300. I paid 275 for it. So it is not a cheap webcam, but it is also on the higher spectrum for webcams that aren't like conference cams with super wide angle lenses and that sort of thing. It's probably as good as you'd go before you start thinking capture card and DSLR for your computer. But of course, then you're talking at added costs again on top of that. So it all depends on the budget, and it depends on how serious you are with what you're doing with it. So for me, it's obviously streaming, which you can check me out. I try to stream every Friday at Joel from AU. For me, I don't need much more than this currently. Until I see more of a need, or for some ungodly reason this takes off for me, there is no reason for me to need more than the Brio. Brio does everything I need it to do. I want 1080p, 60 FPS, it does it. Not much more I need for just a webcam. If you liked the video or you found some of the information helpful, please hit that like button, hit subscribe if you want to keep up with my future videos. It's all appreciated. You'll find that I've got over 160 videos on my channel already, though most of them aren't reviews as such, but all entertaining. Hit the bell if you want to get a notification every time I put up a video, or check me out when I stream every Friday, or try to be every Friday on Twitch. Joel from AU. Much appreciated. Thank you for dropping by.